Hello, and welcome to the podcast series. In this edition, we discuss traumatic brain injury in children. And here to walk us through our esteemed guest, Associate Professor Ursula Rohlwink, who is an International Wellcome Trust Fellow, an award, an accolade given only to the creme de la creme in research. Professor, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for the invitation and for partnering with us on this very important issue.
Wonderful. One of the things I wanted us to talk about was our first engagement here. You came across so passionate and excited about your report and research statistics, and some of it quite fascinating. But I did kind of almost feel like I was having a stroke. I think some of the important issues there, one statistic in particular that made me sit up and pay very close attention was the incidence of TB, HIV, and malaria combined. Unpack that statistic for me quickly.
So that statistic was that if we look at injury-related deaths, and that is a major focus in our research group, we see that as much as HIV, TB, and malaria are massive burdens of disease globally and on our continent, if we look at that burden relative to the burden of injury, we can see that the burden of injury is 40% greater. Okay. So more children will die of an injury-related death. So particularly in children who are otherwise healthy and over the age of 5, their number one cause of dying is due to injury rather than HIV, TB, or malaria.
Right.
That said, the focus of research and investment on our continent and in the global south more generally has been on infectious disease. And so injury, and particularly injury to the head, is a silent epidemic that goes unnoticed, under-researched, and underfunded.
Sure. And I mean, it's no secret that in the past decade or two, even longer, the global funding has been channeled towards HIV
Absolutely.
and TB, and they've gotten the lion's share in research support and operational implementation of programs and community outreach. So to help viewers understand the sheer scale of it, I mean, the statistics last year show that 7.2 million South Africans were living with HIV, and more than 85,000 died due to HIV-related causes.
Yes.
So if we take that 85,000 as a yardstick, and it's taking only HIV and not including TB and malaria as the triple burden, it kind of shows us what proportion do you think of that would have been children? About a third?
So HIV is mainly because of very effective mother-to-child antiretroviral rollout. Right. We are seeing much lower rates of HIV infection in children. The interesting thing is that more and more research is showing that just because a child is not infected doesn't mean that their immune response is not actually impacted by the exposure to the HIV when they are in the womb. Right. So that raises a whole nother set of questions. But I would say that about a third or less of those numbers will be children. And that's really a credit to these campaigns and to the work that's been done. And it demonstrates that if we're able to put that kind of investment, that kind of effort, that kind of policy change into place for injury, we can have an even greater impact because we know that injury takes many more lives, many more children's lives than HIV does.
Right. And I mean, I think it highlights the urgency, especially for grant makers and philanthropists and also CSI managers that should be paying close attention now. As this issue of traumatic brain injury is fast becoming the leading cause of...
It is. In children who are healthy and over the age of 5, because we need to consider infant mortality due to things like gastro and so on. But in children over the age of 5, it is the number one cause of death, injury. And of those injury-related deaths, it's the injuries to the head, because we know that our brains are what make us human beings. They are responsible for our ability to think, our ability to function in life, our ability to have personalities. And in children, it is it is the child's future. Relies on them having a well-functioning brain, because if they have damage when they're 3-4 years old, they struggle to go to normal schools. They may struggle with mobility. They may never play sport. They may never live a full life. And the impact of that injury is for a very long time.
Sure.
As compared to an adult, for example, who's maybe 40 or 50 when they have an injury, they've lived a big part of their life. Children, their lives are robbed from them from the very beginning when they have an injury to the brain. So we really, really need to focus on preventing those injuries, and when they do happen, treating them in the best possible way that we can give them the best possible chance of a full and fulfilling life.
And would the developing nervous system and brain of a child be treated differently to that of an adult?
Absolutely.
So why?
The developing brain is unique. It has its own vulnerabilities, but it also has its own strengths relative to the developed brain, which makes it so fascinating. So it's developing at an incredible rate. We know that children under the age of 2 are probably the most vulnerable to long-term difficulties, because the brain is developing at such a pace that injury and disturbance at that time has a massive impact. After the age of 2, a lot of the sort of formative networks have been laid, and the gross anatomical structures are in place, and they continue to grow and develop. And then they have this incredible capacity for plasticity, as we call it. So that's the ability for the brain to rewire itself. So we know that, for example, the right side of the brain controls the movement of the left side of the body. And the left side of the brain controls the movement of the right side of the body. But we've seen in children who've had dramatic injuries on one side of the brain, we've seen that function can move over to the other side of the brain.
That's fascinating.
Which will never happen in adults. Because by the time when the adult brain is fully developed, it loses that instant capacity to rewire itself. So we have to consider those extreme vulnerabilities in children, but also the fact that they have a greater chance to recover. And we also need to consider that anatomically they're different. So if you think of the ratio of the head to the body in children, that's one of the reasons children are so sweet and cute, because they have big round heads relative to their smaller bodies. But that makes them more vulnerable to impact to the head. And the neck muscles, for example, are weaker, but the force with the bigger head is greater. So that makes them more vulnerable to structural damage as a consequence of impact. They're also physiologically vastly different. So the amount of blood flow that's going to the brain is much, much greater in children. And that's because the brain is active, it's growing, it's developing, it's changing. So it needs a lot of energy, and that energy comes from blood flow. So we know that is much greater in children. So the way we look after kids in the ICU, for example, the way we look at their blood pressure, the way we look at the pressure that develops in the brain, the way we look at the sources of energy that they're getting is quite different from the way that we look at that in adults.
It's quite encouraging to hear that, can I call it bounce back or a rebound?
Yes.
Is that they're far more resilient than what we give them credit for.
Absolutely.
But despite that resilience, the figures are still showing that much needs to be done.
Absolutely. So just because they're resilient doesn't mean they don't need assistance in that resilience. And that comes from, that's why we need proper research, not only into the acute care. So what do we do for them when they come to hospital, but not only when they come here, but the journey from the accident to the hospital. So that's one of the things we've researched, for example. It's taking far too long for children who have an accident out in the community to reach a hospital like Red Cross, where they can get the care that they need. So that's one of the first things we need to do. Time is absolutely critical. The quicker they can get to the hospital, the better. And then it's the resources at the hospital and the knowledge of how best to manage the brain. And the brain is complex. So here at Red Cross, we've got the most sophisticated brain monitoring system in the entire world. Nobody else monitors the pediatric brain the way we do. And that's because we believe it's absolutely critical to understand everything that's going on inside the brain so that we can tailor treatment specific to that child on that day. And then we have to think about after they've left hospital. They are critical need of proper schooling, rehabilitation. Their families need support. So it's various steps in the whole care pathway that we need to look at and improve. And then we give them the ultimate chance for that incredibly plastic brain to do its wonderful, rejuvenating job.
So neuroscience, I mean, quite a perplexing and complex sort of discipline. Where is the research at now when it comes to the child's brain, like the developing brain?
So there are a lot of incredible studies going on at the moment. There is a lot of recognition, both from researchers and funders internationally, that understanding the developing brain is going to be key for us to understand the aging brain. So a lot of people are interested, why is my brain dementing? Why am I developing Alzheimer's? We have to go back to how the brain developed and the various exposures that the developing brain had or went through in order for us to understand where we land up as adults. So there is a great sense of realization that we need to focus a lot of attention on understanding the way the developing brain is growing. And so within the university and at Red Cross as well, Professor Kirsty Donald, she's a neurodevelopmental pediatrician. She's doing a lot of research to understand the first 100 days of life. What is happening to the brain in those first 100 days? Right. And one of the things we're realizing is the brain is dramatically affected by things that the child or the baby is exposed to while they're still in the womb, whether it's what the mother's taking in nutritionally or, in terms of things like alcohol, drugs, etc., but also mental health of the mother, environmental influences. So it's very exciting. It's a massively exciting field, and it's advancing, and we're learning so much. And we really hope that what we learn can have applications beyond just children.
Sure. Before we delve into some of the cause of traumatic brain injury in children, while we're on the topic of nutrition and in the womb, is there any particular guidance or advice for mothers and prospecting parents to take into consideration for optimal brain development?
So one of the key and most beneficial things that a young woman who's even just anticipating falling pregnant can do is to take folate. So there's been a big drive to actually add folate into, or to supplement bread and flour with folate, because it's absolutely critical to the development of the spinal cord. So we see a lot of children still, unfortunately, who are born with open spinal cords, and that is a consequence of a folate deficiency. So it's a very simple thing to do that can make a massive difference, because those children often are then paralyzed and have difficulties beyond just the spine, also in the brain. So any anticipating mom, I highly recommend that they take folate supplementation, and then just basic good nutrition, and avoiding alcohol, avoiding cigarettes, avoiding drugs. These are absolutely critical.
Right. Thank you. Now, moving on to the major cause of traumatic brain injury in children, being motor vehicle accident related. In your report released last year, you sort of gave an indication, or there was a statistic showing that it was without proper restraints.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that, children ending up in the trauma unit that were not restrained.
Absolutely. So in our group, the African Brain Child, which is based in paediatric neurosurgery, we see the children who come in with the severest forms of these injury. But we also have exposure to those that have milder injuries. Right. So Professor Figaji, who is the head of the African Brain Child Initiative, has for a long time been concerned about why we're seeing so many children, and initiated a program of collecting the data on those children. So information about the circumstances around the injury. And one of the things that leapt out was the fact that of every 100 children that are admitted to Red Cross, because they've had a severe brain injury, or even a moderate or mild brain injury, that were in a motor vehicle accident, only 4 of those 100 children were wearing a seatbelt.
Okay.
So that is a shocking statistic because seatbelts are the law, wearing seatbelts, using car seats or restraints for children. These are legal requirements. And these are simple, basic interventions that can prevent a massively devastating injury.
Right.
So he felt that this was a really important message that we needed to, as the people who see those damaged brains, that we needed to add our voice to the many other voices like ChildSafe, Wheel Well, other groups, Arrive Alive, that have tried to get that message out there to tell people to put on their seatbelts. And so we launched the Be Quick to Click campaign last year to say, we see these kids. We know they're not wearing seatbelts. We know that we can prevent massive injuries by a simple thing of putting on your seatbelt. It's a big deal. It's quick to do. But as a community, not only in the medical fraternity, but in the broader community, we need to tell our neighbors. We need to tell our siblings. We need to tell, ourselves to do that one easy thing because it's really quick to just put on that seatbelt and prevent a massive injury.
So, do you think that it's bad habit? Do you think it's a stubbornness? It's maybe.
I think.
Why are people so resistant? Or why do parents not take the time to buckle the child up? Or why does the child keep on unbuckling itself?
I think that it's partly a lack of awareness about the consequences.
Right.
And then there's also a lack of awareness that a seatbelt is designed to prevent the individual, whether it's a child or an adult, from becoming a catapult when they are on high impact. So when I've in the past chatted with some of the parents and asked them why they weren't wearing a seatbelt, one of the common answers is, but I was holding my child. So what that demonstrates is a lack of awareness that when you're traveling at speed and you have an impact at speed, even if that speed is not very great, the child's weight is multiplied 10 times by the speed you were traveling. At impact. So a 10-kilogram child who has an accident at 60 kilometers per hour, which is not terribly fast, has an impact weight of 600 kilograms. No individual's arms can contain a 600 kilogram catapult.
Right.
So I think that there hasn't been enough understanding in the community of the consequences and the fact that you cannot substitute a seatbelt with something else.
Right.
You have to use a seatbelt because that's what it's designed for. And one has to use a car seat for children. And, we know, and ChildSafe has been fantastic in putting out information on how to use your car seat, which car seat is appropriate for which age and weight of child. So we're trying to say, we see the consequences of it. It's a big deal. You have to do it.
Yeah. So, and then to the viewers, I read also somewhere that most accidents are likely to occur within 1 kilometer from your point of departure or 1 kilometer from your destination. So don't be complacent and thinking, I'm just going to the shop or I'm just going around the corner, because that motor vehicle crash is closer to home than you think.
Absolutely. We've had so many stories of parents just reversing out of their driveway and somebody hits them and the child is catapulted from the vehicle. So you are quite correct. It doesn't matter if you're traveling 1 kilometer or 100 kilometers, that seatbelt has to be on.
Has to be on. Now, in the report last year, there were also some encouraging statistics in there that to say that when a child and people within the motor vehicle is properly restrained.
Yes.
Help us understand that.
So the statistics show that a child who is properly restrained, either with a seatbelt or a car seat, is 60% less likely to die if there's a motor vehicle accident. For passengers or for the driver who are sitting at the front of the vehicle, they are 40 to 50% less likely to die on impact if they have a motor vehicle accident. So a lot of people will say, oh yes, but seatbelts can be more dangerous. I think what we need to remember is people might have heard a single story of somebody who was in an accident, maybe couldn't get out of the car because the seatbelt was jammed. That is a single story. We need to think of the hundreds of stories that we see where the seatbelt was not used. And I think that's one of the things which is a mistake we all make, that we remember a single event because we don't know. We don't speak to 100 people, we speak to one person. Right. We remember one person's story. We are telling you, we've seen hundreds of people's stories. Right. And the seatbelts are there to save your life. They do save your life. They have to be worn.
Okay. So thank you very much for your time. I think the insights you've given us were, quite substantial and quite a bit to think about, for the general public at large. And this also brings us at the end of today's session on traumatic brain injury. If you enjoyed the content in this video and would like to see more of it, please subscribe, follow, like, and share so that others may benefit from the insights you've gained here today. From ChildSafe, we say thank you to our subject matter expert in neuroscience, and thank you to you for joining us on this journey of discovery and also unpacking some of the important things in child safety as it relates to motor vehicle accidents and traumatic brain injuries in children. Until next time, take care.